Coming up on this edition of The Climate Show, we've got all the climate news that's fit to broadcast. Plus, we're going live to Doha. Cindy Baxter, our Climate Show correspondent, is standing by at COP18. What else we got, Gareth?
We've got the Arctic report card for 2012. It was a long, hot summer up north. And I've got an amazing story about steam and nanoparticles.
Can't wait. It's all coming up on this edition of The Climate Show. This episode of The Climate Show is brought to you by hot-topic.co.nz, cyblogs.co.nz, skepticalscience.com, scoop.co.nz, and idealog.co.nz.
What good is a drop in the ocean? What good is a drop in the ocean?
Welcome along to The Climate Show, episode number 31, recording the 6th day of December 2012. My name is Glenn Williams, recording in South London, United Kingdom. My co-host Gareth Ronalden back there in New Zealand. How you doing, Gareth?
I'm very well, thank you. And hello from the Waipara Valley, the home of great New Zealand wine.
Indeed. Of course, this is a show all about climate science, the policy, politics, the solutions, sometimes the skeptics as well. And this is a video show if you're listening to the audio, and you can also find it in audio as well, a few different flavours. Its home is theclimateshow.com and also hot-topic.co.nz, where we put all the show notes up and so you can follow what's going on. It's hopefully a way to be able to absorb all that climate information, all that climate news that's been happening over the past couple of weeks in an easily digestible sub-hour format show. So hopefully you will enjoy this.
If we manage a sub-hour, we'll be doing extremely well, Glenn.
Exactly.
But I would like to mention that we also have a Facebook page, we have a Google Plus page, we're available as a podcast on iTunes, through Stitcher, on Android and iOS. So anywhere you can get audio and video, you should be able to find us, I hope.
Yeah, indeed. So very shortly we're going to roll through the news, some of the big news over the past couple of weeks or so, and also our special guest joining us in Doha at the COP18 conference, Cindy Baxter, who's a climate strategist and currently blogging for Hot Topic, Gareth.
That's right, and she's Hot Topic's correspondent in Doha. I'm very pleased to be able to say that. Cindy's been to lots of these things over the last 20 years. I think she was probably there at the first meetings of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. So she's been around the hoops. She knows this whole sort of political process extremely well. So it'll be a great pleasure to have Cindy on to chat to her. It'll be up to the minute stuff.
Indeed, and she's even got a little Hot Topic press badge, I think, that she's been.
Yeah, I know.
It gets her around the place.
I want one of those too.
Yeah,
I want one.
Yeah.
We can actually, Glenn. No, you and I should have climate show.
Exactly.
Press badges.
That's what I'm thinking. Next time, where is the next one?
I don't know.
Warsaw?
That's a very good
Is it
question.
Warsaw? I think it might be Warsaw.
Oh, it might be. Yes, indeed.
I'm not too far away. I'm in the neighbourhood.
It might take me a while to paddle over there, but never mind.
Yeah.
Anyway, let's move on.
Yes.
Let's move on, because although we're going to be majoring on Doha, Doha is not the only big important meeting that's going on this week. Over in San Francisco, in the Moscone Center, where Apple announced all their major new products, is the American Geophysical Union's fall meeting. Now, that's one of the biggest scientific meetings in the world, and just about every climate scientist who isn't in Doha will be there, either meeting or talking or presenting papers, posters, whatever.
So this is where where the science is done and the politics is at COP18.
Yeah, pretty much. And I just wanted to pull one thing out. A couple of years ago, of course, we talked live to Peter Gleich at the AGU Fall meeting. This year, John Cook, our old buddy, is over there. I think he's been taking part in a number of presentations and probably enjoying himself greatly. Hello, John. I hope you're having a good time.
Yeah.
Very jealous I am, as usual. And I'm looking forward to welcoming John back onto the show in the new year.
Yeah, we need to make that
just-
connection. We need to plug those chords in again.
We certainly do. Now that you're settling down in London and we're getting the sort of wrinkles ironed out of our transcontinental communication setup, we should do. And I promised John in an email a while ago that we would. So here we are. It's another public promise, John. Anyway, I wanted to pull one major item out of the sort of avalanche of science that's coming out of the AGU 4 meeting, and that was I guess yesterday in New Zealand time, or earlier today, depending on where you are, the Arctic report card has just been released for 2012. And this is something that NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration in the US, has been releasing for a number of years now, and basically looks at all aspects of what's going on in the Arctic. And the 2012 report card headline is "Becoming Warmer, a Greener Region with Record Losses of Summer Sea Ice and Late Spring Snow." So the headline items are that the snow cover in the Arctic region reached a record low in June 2012, and a new record low in May over Eurasia. So, and that's we always like to focus on the sea ice, which also set a new record this year, but the snow cover's been declining steeply over the same period. So it's not just ice that's going, the snow cover. And interestingly, the snow cover there's lots of feedbacks involved in this, that the lack of snow cover means the ground gets warmer, the ground cover getting warmer means the permafrost begins to melt. It feeds back into the circulation of the atmosphere. So almost all of the feedbacks that we're seeing in the Arctic at the moment are moving in the direction of warmth. And that's one of the most worrying kind of headline news items out of the Arctic report card this year. So we had the record snow cover, we had the record minimum sea ice in September, the Greenland ice sheet had that remarkably rare melt season where virtually all of the ice sheet melted for a while in July, and the record melt over all parts of the Greenland ice sheet. The gravity data for the ice mass loss over the year, not complete for the year yet because it's still not there, but it still looks as though it's been a record melt season. We're looking at tundra getting greener all around the Arctic, and there's a lot more above ground growth. And the length of the growing season, as you might expect, if the place is getting warmer, so plants start to grow earlier in the season because the snow's melting, and they can grow longer in the autumn because the snow's not arriving. And then you've got that obviously affects the wildlife and the various food chains. So in the northern parts of Europe, the Arctic fox is close to extinction, and the red fox is encroaching on its area and kind of pushing it out of the way because the Arctic fox's particular requirements are not being met. And fascinatingly, there were massive phytoplankton blooms in the Arctic Ocean underneath and next to the summer sea ice this year. And the scientists have calculated that they may have considerably underestimated the amount of biological production, in other words, the amount of growth that can go on in an ice-free ocean up there. And that, of course, will have lots of feedbacks to the whole oceanic ecosystem. And then, the ocean, sea surface temperatures, obviously, where there's no ice, it's much warmer than they would usually be. And the sort of layers of warmth in the ocean are also showing warming, but there's no particular trends in the variability of all that other than general warming. And then the weather, and the Arctic report card talks about 3 particular storms. There was one in November 2011, and another one in north of Alaska in August that had a contribution to the reduction or the record low sea ice extent. And then interestingly, they draw attention to the very cold late January and early February cold spell in Europe. And that's a function of the atmospheric circulation. I'm sure we talked about this at the time, but because of the changes that we're seeing in the dynamics of the sea ice system, the heat that has to be lost when the ice refreezes affects the circulation of the atmosphere around the North Pole, around the whole of the Northern Hemisphere. And if you get into a particular setup with the so-called Arctic oscillation, you can get the cold air kind of spills out. And that's what happened in Europe in January and early February. It was the coldest winter for 26 years or more in some parts of Europe. So I just draw attention to the Arctic report card. There's a very great deal more to it than I've just summarized, and I was just sort of reading the headlines off the press release there. There's a lot on the website to look at, both in terms of graphics, maps, discussion of various trends in all sorts of areas. If you've got any interest at all in the Arctic, this should be a place for you to go and read, because it's about as up to date as it comes in terms of an overview of what's happening up there.
Okay, and those that will be in the show notes, so you can find the link to that and go and read that for yourself. Okay, so that's the Arctic report cards. Something now that I know that's pretty close to your heart: truffles, right? Now, truffles being
yes, absolutely.
Yes, I thought so. Truffles being affected by heat and drought, Gareth.
Yes, absolutely. And you might expect a lot of people to call me, well, down here in Wiper anyway, they call me the Truffle Man, because one of the things that we do on our little farm is grow truffles, and I've written books about it. And in those sorts of in people who are interested in food and fungi generally tend to know who I am.
I can think of worse things to be called. You could be called Hamster Man. I mean, I don't know. That wouldn't be very nice. Truffle Man's fine.
Although no, actually, I'm told that hamsters are quite tasty. Actually, anyway. Well, if you're South American, they anyway. Basically, truffles. What I'm referring to here is. Truffles are an underground fungus. They grow on the roots or grow in association with the roots of trees. And over the last 20 years, there's been a significant reduction in the amount of truffles being harvested in France and Spain and northern Italy, which are the key places where the so-called French black truffle, or Tuber melanosporum, is harvested. And this recent paper, published at the end of November, by Ulf Buntgen and Simon Egli from the Swiss Federal Research Institute, have examined the sort of historical record. And what they're finding is that in hotter, drier summers, truffle production falls. And when you look at the climate projections for the regions of Europe where truffles are produced, those are the central and southern France, the higher limestone mountains of central and northern Spain, and then the limestone regions of northern Italy, climate projections show those areas becoming hotter and drier. And so the long-term outlook for truffle production in France and Spain in particular is that it could suffer. And interestingly, what Herr Buntgen and Simon Egli say is that the northern area of the Alps, where there's also plenty of limestone, because the black truffle likes limestone, could become a new productive area. Because if you like, the perfect conditions for truffles will actually be moving north. And this is something that's probably already being seen in the wine business, because over the last 20 years, for instance, this I'm sure will be a subject close to your heart. We've seen wine production increasing markedly in southern England, and southern England now, Kent, Surrey, Sussex, so on, producing very, very good white wines. There's been investment from champagne producers in that area. And that is purely a function of increasing warmth. So I wanted to draw attention to truffles, partly because it's something that I can talk for hours about if you'll ever let me. I usually get kicked under the table by the kids when I get started on truffles, but there we are. But as a lead into something slightly more significant in many ways, although for any gourmet or gourmand, the future of truffles is a very important subject. But really, climate change, there's a report out from the European Environment Agency around about the time that the Truffle paper was publicized. And that is that a new report called Climate Change Impacts and Vulnerability in Europe 2012, it's a kind of annual summary, finds that average temperatures are increasing across Europe, decreased precipitation in the southern regions, increasing precipitation in northern Europe, and after your wet summer in London, you'll know all about that.
Yeah.
And plus, there's been marked loss of ice from alpine glaciers. They include Greenland in Europe, but that's because it's just not really very close, but it's a Danish territory, or it has close ties to Denmark. That's why they do that. Plus, they're losing permafrost soils are warming up throughout northern Europe. And they also point to an increase in extreme weather events such as heat waves, floods, and droughts. And I think, basically all of the headline items that we expect to see with climate change are already being observed across Europe.
Yeah.
So that's quite an important report, because it kind of underlines that you can look at the Arctic and we can say, look, that is rapid climate change, and it's happening now. It's happening on our watch. But, other things, from the details of how truffles are growing through to what's happening across the whole of Europe, all of that is happening now. So climate change is not theoretical. It's a real thing.
All right.
Okay, let's move on from royal weddings.
Yeah.
I think it's probably time that we went to our guest in Doha, don't you?
Indeed, I think so. I think we've lost our train of thought enough. Before we go to Doha,
No, you won't lose the train of thought unless the wrong type of snow falls on the lines, Glenn.
That's true. Hey, before we go to Doha, I do want to thank our media partners who help us distribute the show and get it out there to a wider public. We thank you very much to cyblogs.co.nz, livenews.co.nz, and through Scoop as well. Plus also Idealog in the sustain section there at idealog.co.nz for helping distribute the show. And as we say, you can also find all the show notes up at theclimateshow.com and hot-topic.co.nz. Rightio, let's head off to Doha. And now, very pleased to welcome onto the show special New Zealand guest Cindy Baxter, who's a climate media strategist who has attended just about every major international climate meeting over the past 20 years. She's a veteran of the talks. She's also blogging for Hot Topic at the moment. She's in Doha with climate scientists. Welcome to the show, Cindy Baxter.
Thank you.
And what a time to be in Doha with these climate talks. What a strange sort of place Doha is, I would imagine. I've never been there, but seeing the photos, it looks very unnatural.
It's very strange. It's a really strange city. It's a huge, big conference centre that they've built. I don't know. It's just weird. It's in the middle of nowhere, in the middle of the desert. We went out to a party on the beach the other night, the NGO party, and we went past the biggest gas plants I've ever seen. They were like cities.
Wow.
And I think the carbon footprint of every Qatarian is 50 tonnes per person. It's the highest per capita emissions on the planet.
So either the worst place to have some climate talks like this, or the best, because it kind of demonstrates sort of what's really wrong with what we're doing with the planet.
Yeah, I guess it does. I mean, the head of the president of the COP, when these meetings are held in country, that country chairs the meeting. So you've got the president of the COP is a former president of OPEC, right. And next year we are going to be in cold country. So. I don't think it's a coincidence that they've been organised like this. Some hands in the background, I think.
How have the Qataris been running the meeting? I know when Denmark ran the Copenhagen thing, they were trying to push all sorts of things. What do we think the Qataris are up to?
Similar sort of things. They're not being very. They haven't been very good. They haven't been following the people together like they need to. It's been quite slack. There's been a lot of problems with it. But I think now that ministers arrived, I think they've been rounded up a little bit, and things perhaps might be pointing in the right direction, but I'm not sure what the direction is anyway.
Yeah. So, So tell us, what's the sort of the headline news? We're talking to you on Thursday New Zealand time, so I guess it's Thursday evening New Zealand time, Thursday morning in Doha. Couple of days to go.
2 days to go, ostensibly if we finish on Friday night, but more like probably we're putting bets on sometime Saturday afternoon. There's still a lot of issues up in the air. There's the issue, there's the hot air. I mean, basically what they have to do here, what they're supposed to do is finish the LCA, which is a discussion that started in Bali, which is the long-term cooperation agreement, and then also the Kyoto Protocol, to close those two tracks so that they can then get on to discussing the global agreement that's supposed to be agreed in 2015 and come into force in 2020. So, yeah, we're stuck, basically, as usual. There's all sorts of discussions. We heard this morning that the finance discussion is being held up because basically what they want to do is what they call operationalize the climate fund, so that they can start dispersing money, as they promised, $100 billion in a year to developing countries. But the developed countries don't want to do the operationalization of the climate fund, because then they have to start putting money into it, which, you can't have that. And then you've got the Kyoto Protocol, you've got the issue of hot air and what to do with all the hot air surplus, because if all that hot air remains in the trading system, it would be business as usual for the industrialized world till 2026. So
let's just explain.
The issues.
Let's just explain what hot air means. These are carbon credits under Kyoto rules that have been allocated into Eastern Europe, which represent credit for emissions that were never made. Basically, is that right?
Yeah. Essentially, the date of Kyoto started, it was 1990. Then you had the collapse of Eastern Europe. So essentially, I mean, it was the emissions they were emitting before Kyoto came into force, basically. So, and then they collapsed. So it looked as though, ostensibly on paper, they reduced their emissions. So they had all these credits. But I mean, you can blame the collapse of Eastern Europe, or you can blame the parties to the Kyoto Protocol who allowed these hot air units to come into the process in the first place. It's patently ridiculous. Some of the Eastern European countries are arguing that they want to, that they need them. They need these hot air units to be able to, to be able to grow their GDP. Well, I mean, essentially, in Ukraine, their GDP would have to grow by 11.5% per year for them to use up all those units.
Amazing. Because there's no economy in the world that's growing at anything like that rate at the moment.
And I don't think the Ukrainians are looking to be heading that way anytime soon.
No, that's probably right.
No.
So, I know you've been working with scientists who've been looking very closely at where emissions, what sort of emissions trajectory we need to be on if we're going to control this sort of runaway beast that we're sitting on. What's the feeling from the scientists you're working with about how the process is delivering, how the process might deliver?
Well, I mean, everybody knows that the emissions are going in completely the wrong direction. We've just heard news this week, the Global Carbon Project, that they're rising 3%. I think they're 2.6% this year, due to rise again next year. They're heading in the wrong direction. We need to get them down and on the right trajectory. I mean, these scientists, it's interesting because a lot of people are trying to play down the 2-degree limit that was agreed in Copenhagen, that, okay, we need to keep global warming to 2 degrees or less from pre-industrial times. But the problem is, a lot of people have been, Todd Stern from the US has said, look, you can't do it. It's not possible and it's not useful. It's not helpful to the negotiations. But we know it is helpful. We know that there's a whole list of things that have been done because of that 2-degree limit that's been agreed. So, it's getting more and more difficult to reach that to be on the right trajectory. We're heading to about 3.54 degrees at the moment. So we've got to bring it down. And the problem is that if we wait until 2020, which is what the US wants to do, we're going to do our Copenhagen promises until 2020, and then the new agreement will kick in. Now, if we wait that long, we're going to have so few choices left as a society in terms of which way we want to go, in terms of if we really want to if we want to keep global warming below 2 degrees. We won't have a choice about it.
Yeah, the bottom line is that the later we leave it, the more expensive it's going to be if we want to try and limit it. But that we're losing the options. I think at the time of Copenhagen, it was really only a sort of 50-50 bet that we could keep it to 2 degrees anyway. And the longer we leave it, the worse that bet becomes. That's
right. I mean, I think the scientists I'm working with, the Climate Action Tracker, these guys are, from the Peak Potsdam Institute, which of climate impact research. They've been, they're one of the, they're sort of the top in the world in this particular speciality. They say there's still a 66%, more than 66% chance of keeping global warming to below 2 degrees. But basically, we'd have to cut emissions from now by 15% by 2020. The problem is that these talks aren't really talking about, these negotiators aren't really talking about cutting emissions now. They're talking about not doing anything else until 2020, apart from the paltry pledges they agreed in Copenhagen. So there's still a sense of urgency going on in there.
There was this call before these talks that everything should be based on the science. So that has obviously not happened at all.
No, it never has. The thing is, these negotiators they're immune. I mean, I was in a press conference the other day. I think it was the WMO State of the Climate press conference, where they said that global warming is now visible, it is clear, it is with us, and it's going to get worse. It's like 2010 was the 9th warmest year, that sort of thing. And I was talking to someone from the Qatari delegation from the presidency, and a UN official came past, and the Qatari guy was asking me, look, what is this going to make an impact, this sort of thing? And the UN official walked past and said, no, these guys are immune. They've been in this bubble for 20 years, and the bubble, it just bounces off. It doesn't make any difference to them here. Science does come into the negotiations when you've got the AOSIS, the Alliance of Small Island States, and the least developed countries, smallest, most vulnerable countries. They talk about the science all the time, but it doesn't really drive the talks. I mean, that's the problem. What drives the talks is sort of a series of, we can't do this, we can't do that, we can't do the next thing. And what is really driving the talks is the relationship between the industrialized governments and their corporations at home, to be honest.
Yeah. So there is still this dividing line between developed and developing nations there.
Yeah, I mean, there's several dividing lines. There's also a dividing line between, within, the G77, the least developed countries, the LDCs. There's a group of 44 of the smallest and most vulnerable countries in the G77. And then you've got the AOSIS countries, the Alliance of Small Island States, like all our Pacific Island neighbours. They're in that. So, and then you've got, within the G77, the developing country, big group, you've got China, you've got India, you've got Brazil, you've got South Korea, you've got Mexico, who are, much more developed countries than these tiny little ones. And they're also big emitters. And they're the ones that everybody points the finger at and says, you've got to come in and be part of this agreement.
Yeah. So to the casual observer would probably say, well, these talks, they seem to end up this way every single year. What is the point? Surely there's a better way of doing this.
The thing is, the process is fine. The process is actually set up quite well. All the rules, all the mechanisms, everything else, if countries wanted to increase their targets. Now, what's stopping, for example, New Zealand from having a very strong Kyoto target from actually cutting emissions is not this process, it's Fonterra. It's Business New Zealand, who are all now Business New Zealand is represented on our delegation here. in the US, it's the Koch brothers, the funding of corporates, of the political process. That's what's stopping the action on climate change. Is not this process. If these countries all came here with big fat targets and saying, right, we're going to cut emissions, it'd be fine. It's all set up to work beautifully. What's happening? It's this, until we get the separation of oil and state, we won't get much in this process. But everyone likes to blame the process, but it's not really the process's fault.
The problem is really, isn't it, is that you've got all these kind of weird, if all these countries were individuals, were people, they would be estranged of dysfunctional families, wouldn't they? And they would all turn up with their own domestic baggage that they have, and that's what they bring to the table.
That's right. All their, what we call special needs. New Zealand argues that we've got special needs. Yeah.
So tell me, Cindy, you said that the negotiators are in a bubble, and that within that bubble they're ruled by their local politics and their local business interests. What on earth can the rest of us do to burst that bubble and make them sit up and pay attention?
We put the pressure on at home. That's what we have to do. Separation of oil and state begins at home. That Fonterra, Business New Zealand, if the government gets the message loud enough, that they will, that's when they change policies. How you change government policy. It's how you stop the conservation estate from being mined is by getting on the streets and changing the government's mind. That's, by, protest at home. It's got to happen at home. I mean, in New Zealand, that's, I don't know quite how, there's so much to talk to the government about in New Zealand and to protest that we're all a bit lost about where to start. But
yes,
I must say,
right.
New Zealand is just really so unpopular here.
Yeah, we got the Fossil of the Day award. We didn't only just win it, we got first.
About 5 times.
Yeah, about 5 times. One day we got first and second.
Yep.
How embarrassing. That is so embarrassing compared to our stance and how we used to be at these talks. We used to be the leaders. We used to lead from the front, and we used to be able to hold our heads up in pride. Not anymore.
Yeah. That's right. And I think I was talking to Kennedy Graham, who arrived this week. The Green MP, and he and the 7 members of the New Zealand youth delegation, we all sort of have to walk around apologising for our government. Look, I didn't vote for them. I'm really sorry. That's sort of how it works here. It's like, we're having to. It's really embarrassing being a New Zealander in these talks.
Wow.
Yeah.
So as Glenn said, it's amazing how that's changed in just a few years. I know you've detected, I think...
even under Helen Clark, they weren't great. I mean, seriously, they've been operating, they haven't been good for a long time, this government, actually, at these talks.
Now, I think you mentioned to me earlier that you detected some sort of softening in the US position, obviously with the re-election of Obama and perhaps the impact of Superstorm Sandy, that perhaps that's helping to make things happen.
Well, it's been interesting. I mean, Jonathan Pershing, the head of the US delegation, arrived here last week. His first press conference was like basically business as usual. And that's how they've been operating. However, there's been quite a big pushback here. And I think suddenly we've got Todd Stern yesterday changing his stance from a week ago, which is Todd Stern's the climate envoy. Means Death Star in German, which I think is quite interesting. But he actually yesterday said he wanted to have a conversation about equity. I mean, there's a very big conversation about equity going on here about, what people should do, what, developing countries should do, who should go first, all that sort of, all the poverty conversations about, how you ask the poorest people to act on climate change when it's going to hurt them economically. But he actually softened yesterday and said that he wanted a conversation about equity. Now, maybe it's a tiny little glimmer of hope, but really up until yesterday, we hadn't seen any change in the US whatsoever.
So all of these conferences, the host country likes to be able to point to something as a victory or as progress at the end of the day. What's your pick of where that's going to fall for COP18?
That's an interesting one. I mean, it's not the most interesting of meetings. Just trying to think. Really, I think just a successful agreement on the second commitment period of the Kyoto Protocol and of all its rules. I mean, if that happens, that will be what he will be claiming. Let's see how that goes.
That will just apply. That will just apply to Europe and Australia and one or two other countries, though, won't it?
Well, that's right, but the rules around it, all the rules about trading, about flexible mechanisms and hot air and all that sort of stuff, would be the rules that would generally be adopted for the next agreement, for the big agreement. So, there's a lot of rules in there. There's a lot of rules about how you do all this stuff, and they wouldn't be changed. I mean, that's the thing. They would set up to come into force in 2020. So, I mean, they're the rules that New Zealand wants to continue trading under. While we walk away from Kyoto and we want to continue trading under its rules, which is how so New Zealand's actually being quite difficult in the negotiations because they're saying, well, we want the rules like this, like that. And people are going, well, hold on, you're not even part of Kyoto at the moment. But yeah, so it is. I mean, Kyoto is it sets up a framework. The rules set up a framework for any future agreement.
Yeah. Okay. So we know that New Zealand's been sort of taking. It'll be the permanent winner of the fossil of the day. Obviously, the government will be taking home a very large fossil to put on John Key's mantelpiece. But if you had to pick, who are the good guys in the meeting?
The alliance of the island states and the vulnerable countries. I mean, they're the victims. They're the good guys. They're they're doing their best. I think definitely. But I mean, they're the ones who've got the most to lose, and they're always the good guys. The Pacific states. It's a shame we don't actually do more to help them as a government. I just wanted to mention one more thing. There was this there's this discussion now called loss and damage, which is about the industrialized world paying the smallest countries now for the impacts of climate change that they're suffering. And the one of the spokespeople for the small island states said yesterday in a press conference, he said, look, we wanted mitigation. We wanted you to cut your emissions so we wouldn't get climate change, right? We then wanted you to give us money so we could adapt to the impacts of climate change. But now we're having to fast forward into a conversation about loss and damage and who is going to pay for the impacts of climate change. They haven't had the money to help them adapt. They certainly didn't get the countries to stop climate change. So now we're in a loss and damage discussion. It's pretty grim the way we're going. But these small island states, they're hanging out. They're hanging out for the climate, and they're the ones who talk the most about the science.
Yeah. Well, it's a very great pity that the science doesn't find a happier home with the real power brokers at these meetings.
Yeah, I know, absolutely. It's a real shame. I mean, there is a scientific discussion going on. That's why the commitment period of the Kyoto Protocol is so important, because basically, if you get 8 years, well, you don't have to change your targets for 8 years. You imagine how much science there's been during that 8 years. So and that's so. The small island states and our guys want to limit it to 5 years so that you can review the science and go, right, we need to act faster. And that's where the science does come in, is the review of the adequacy of the commitments, as it's called. Sorry, I'm getting into conference speak now.
Are there still the climate skeptic protesters hanging around these conferences? Do they still make a show?
There's just one. A couple of them, actually. He's Lord Monckton, turned up yesterday. Monckton of Arabia, by the looks of it. He's got full Arab regalia on. I will be writing a blog about this. So I imagine, so we'll hear about that. He has a press conference today with Senator James Inhofe, who's probably the leading denier Republican, who's famous for his quote, climate change is the biggest hoax perpetrated on humankind, or something like that. That's his And so they're having a press conference this afternoon, which I shall go to. But, I mean, he's just a laughingstock. It has to be said that these guys used to play a central role in these talks, but now they've moved out.
Yeah.
Now they're a laughingstock, but to be honest, in the US, they've done their damage.
Yeah, and also, was there any talk about, because 2012 was an extreme year for extreme weather events? So did people talk about Sandy, even though we can't attribute individual weather events to climate change? Did people talk about the trends that they're now witnessing around us?
Yeah. They do in the press conferences, they do in the speeches of the ministers, but they don't in the actual negotiations. I mean, it was certainly raised yesterday by the Small Island State, Ronnie Jumo from the Seychelles. He said, look, 3 governors have just asked for $82 billion from Obama to pay for Sandy. The developing world wants $100 billion from all the industrialized world every year till 2020 to pay for climate change. We're not asking for that much. Look at that context.
Yeah, true.
So, but it's not actually happening in the talks. It'll be in the rhetoric, but not in the negotiations.
Yeah, it's a great shame. It really does look as though, we're going to have unimaginable horrors before the political apparatus is going to wake up and take things seriously.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's until those negotiators get home and have their children yell at them, what are you doing? What were you thinking? It's my future.
Yeah.
That we're going to, that's where we may get change.
Well, I hope the youth delegation are giving Mr. Grosser and his team a very hard time.
They are. They actually took the fossil into the New Zealand delegation room the other night and delivered it specially. I haven't seen the video. It's somewhere around. I'll have a look for it. But they're doing a really good job. But, I mean, really, it's just embarrassing being a Kiwi here.
Unfortunate.
Oh, well, that's a great shame to hear that, Cindy. But look, thank you very much for finding the time this morning. I know that those events they certainly eat up a huge amount of your time, and you'll be looking forward to getting home to your cat and having a good sleep, won't you, in a few days' time?
Absolutely. Piha, not Doha.
Indeed. Well, Cindy, really appreciate your time, and we'll check out all your blogging up at Hot Topic, and and all that Moncton shenanigans as well. Looking forward to that.
Oh, it's going to be funny. Okay.
Thanks very much.
Cheers, guys.
Cheers.
Okay.
Thanks, Cindy.
Bye.
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 Well, we're about to move on to the solutions segment to finish up the show. But before I move on, Gareth, I just want to point out some breaking news just as we were recording this show about some terrible and extreme weather that took place in Auckland with some tornadoes out in West Auckland that caused a bunch of damage and unfortunately lost some lives out there as well. I hadn't watched any of this footage, but I understand you have. Just stuff that you just can't even imagine being inside of.
Basically, it was a line of thunderstorms embedded in a front moving onto the North Island, and as sometimes happens when you get big thunderstorms. It's big thunderstorms that generate tornadoes in the American Midwest, for instance. In this case, they were generating quite extreme winds. I haven't actually seen any clear pictures of a tornado-type funnel, but I have seen pictures of really extreme winds blowing through the Auckland suburb of Hobsonville. And, yeah, I mean, it's a frightening reminder that just an ordinary thunderstorm, when it gets severe, can cause a lot of damage.
Yeah, full on.
My understanding is that 3 people were killed on a building site as things were basically thrown around by the wind on the building site. There was a great deal of flash flooding through the city. Trees were uprooted and snapped in some cases by the force of the wind. Power was out. It was a really rough lunchtime in Auckland today.
Yeah, absolutely rough. And of course, as always, when we talk about these extreme weather events, we can't attribute any single event to a warming world or climate change. But of course, we are told by scientists that over time, as the world warms, we should expect more extreme weather events around the globe.
Well, one of the key things, one of the things that drives weather systems is the amount of water vapor in the air. And as you get warmer seas and you get general warming in the climate system, so there is more water vapor in the air, and that provides more fuel for the sort of storms that crossed Auckland today. So obviously you're not going to say that climate change caused the deaths in Auckland, because that would be going too far.
Yeah.
But you can say that the sorts of storms we saw today are being made worse by the fact that there is more water vapor in the atmosphere. And you can see that, I mean, there is 4% more moisture in the atmosphere than there was 30, 40 years ago. That's a measurement. You know, we've seen it happen. The other thing is that tornadoes do happen in New Zealand.
Yes.
They tend not to be huge, such as the ones you see in the American Midwest.
Well, yeah, I mean, growing up in New Zealand, we associate deaths in tornadoes with America. We don't necessarily associate death and tornado events in New Zealand.
That's right. But according to NIWA, that's the atmospheric science group in New Zealand, there were around about 7 moderate to strong tornado events reported every year in New Zealand. And most of those don't go anywhere near big cities. And there was a little rush of them in Taranaki and sort of the southwest of the North Island of New Zealand a few years ago, was sort of blowing farm fences over and causing a bit of damage to sheds and so on. And our tornadoes tend to be smaller than the really big ones that you see in America, mainly because the storms themselves tend to be smaller. But we do get occasionally very damaging. I think the most damaging and lethal tornado in New Zealand happened at Frankton in Hamilton on the 25th of August 1948, and that carved a 100 to 200 meter swath through the suburb, caused 3 deaths, 12 injuries, damaged 150 houses and 50 businesses. So that was pretty severe. It remains to be seen what the Auckland tornado today will finally end up, when we finally get an accounting of what the damage that's been done. But
well,
it all
happened.
Not been a good day.
Well, it all happened in John Key's electorate as well. So it's something that he'll be definitely worried about and focusing on in his backyard. Let's move on to the solutions and see what's going on. Let's look at this solar steam project. Apparently, that's so effective it can make steam from icy cold water, Gareth.
Yeah, this is just a story that I write about science fiction, and so I try to keep up with science news and try and think about how that stuff might play out in the future. And this thing struck me because one of the things that I like to monitor is developments in solar energy. And at the end of or middle of November, up in my RSS feed popped this story from Rice University in the US. And the Rice Laboratory for Nanophotonics, now that's a great name, Nanophotonics, they've produced nanoparticles which, when they're immersed in water, light hits these nanoparticles and they heat up so quickly that the water that's touching these particles immediately forms steam. And that steam then sort of leaves the water and you can use it to however you want.
Right.
And so even if the water is icy cold, these nanoparticles will heat up so efficiently that they will create the steam. And it sounds like magic, and it almost is magic because it's really counterintuitive. But they reckon that the overall energy efficiency of these nanoparticles is 24%, which is very significantly higher than the solar photovoltaic efficiencies of 10 to 15%. I think there are some very expensive solar panels that will go up to 20% these days, but they're on 24%, they reckon. And the what's difficult with something like this is to work out how you use it, because one of the great science fiction areas is what one of the great sort of themes of science fiction is what they call steampunk. And steampunk stories, they a strange melange of advanced science set in kind of with Victorian technology,
kind of Tesla type era stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Everything's brass and wood, and there are coils, and there's steam coming out of things.
You love it, don't you?
No, just wonderful stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, I do indeed. I have to tell you that Oamaru, on the South Island of New Zealand, is the steampunk capital of the world.
They have a celebration every year, right?
They do indeed, and you can dress up as a steampunk and walk around Oamaru. Fantastic, really lovely to go there. Actually, I must do that one day. But the idea that the most, a really efficient form of capturing solar power are these little nanoparticles that generate steam. Suddenly you have to start to think, well, maybe we should be thinking about steam power again, capturing the steam, using the steam to drive to whatever. Anyway,
you just fancy driving around in steam cars, don't you? That's what you see, the steamships and all that.
Look, I hanker after an electric vehicle. I really think my next car's got to be an electric vehicle. But if my next car was a steam car, I would be really happy. But anyway, the guys at Rice say that they suspect that the first applications of their technology are actually not going to be in power generation. They're more likely to be in terms of generating and purifying water and sterilizing medical waste and surgical instruments. Because if you can imagine that if you've got steam, as it leaves water, it leaves all any impurities behind. So you could devise a system that would use these nanoparticles to purify water for a village, or without using electricity, just anywhere that's got sun and water. So it's a really, really interesting idea, and one I'm going to be very keen to monitor to see how it goes.
For those watching the video stream, we're looking at some kind of dish, solar dish. So that's part of the contraption that does this?
Yeah, well, what they do is they focus the light onto these nanoparticles. They use a lens, and that's what a parabolic mirror is, effectively. A lens. It focuses it down onto these nanoparticles. You get the steam. Bang, you're off.
There you go. I'll agree with you on the steam thing. It was only just a couple of days ago. I was taking the train from nearby here, and our train, electric train, was just pulling out of the station, and out of nowhere, the steam train just zoomed past at full speed, whistle blowing and everything, and had all the dining cars, and I think it's a Jubilee on the side, and it was absolutely thrilling. It really was. Just the sheer size of it and scale of it, and the sound and all the puffing and the steam and everything was really, really quite nice. Enjoyed it.
Yeah, I know the steam trains are wonderful. Back in the day when I was younger than you are, Glenn, I used to write about hi-fi and work on hi-fi magazines. And one of the jokes was that, somebody would spend 10 grand on a state-of-the-art hi-fi, but if you looked at their record collection, all you'd find is recordings of steam trains going over Shap, which is a pass between England and Scotland. But there is something really visceral about the puffing and panting of a steam engine. And actually, to bring all this back to the Waipara Valley, we have a little steam line here that it doesn't always run on steam. Some days it's diesel, but every weekend the line from Waipara to Waikari opens up, and when they're running the steam engines, actually, even though the station is a good probably 15k away from us,
still hear it.
You can hear the whistle, and you can it's great.
Though they're always shoveling coal into those things, Gareth.
Yeah, but that's all right.
That's okay. All right.
As long as it's only for the purposes of the Waipara to Waikari Express, which runs twice on Sundays every 6 weeks.
I was only preempting.
I'll plant a tree tree to allow that to happen.
Oh, yeah, good. I was only preempting the comments that will no doubt inevitably happen in the YouTube channel or at Hot Topic under this posting of this episode and the conversation that will ensue. So maybe we've cut that one off, hopefully. But we do encourage people to comment. We do want people to send in feedback, and you can do that in the comment section at The Climate Show or Hot-Topic. And the comments also start to happen in the YouTube channel as well under the video, so feel free to make comments there, and we will join in as well as part of the conversation. But that's a show, Gareth.
Yeah, it's good. I've enjoyed this one. It was really good to catch up with Cindy in Doha. She's been blogging about events there at Hot Topic, and really nice to sort of see her face to face in those echoing halls.
Absolutely. So don't forget, you can get it in a couple of flavours, audio and video, and theclimateshow.com or facebook.com/theclimateshow, twitter.com/theclimateshow as well. You can find me up at glennwilliams.co.uk, Gareth at hot-topic.co.nz. That is episode 31. Lovely having you along. Thanks for watching or listening, and we'll be back next time. Cheers, Gareth.
Cheers, Glenn. See you in the new year.
Bye-bye.